With the experience and resources for cases throughout Louisiana, Walters Papillon Thomas Collins, LLC, is proud to support LPB, specializing in personal injury and wrongful death, with information at lawbr.net.
Thank you to all of you for allowing me to come speak with you for lunch. It's rare that I get to speak in Baton Rouge. I speak around the state in many different settings, and I live in Baton Rouge and love Baton Rouge. It's just very special for me, mostly because Tanya is able to be here. She never gets to hear me speak, so I'm a little bit more nervous than normal. I apologize for that, but we're delighted to be here. And guess what? I'm not going to talk to you at all about money and funding for higher education. Is that okay? Yeah. We might mention money in the abstract, but we won't talk about funding for higher ed. We're going to talk a little bit more about the promise of higher ed and how important it is, especially in this day and age where we are. Now, as she mentioned, I'm the president of the University of Louisiana system, and a lot of folks don't really know what that means. We have 4 systems of higher ed in Louisiana. We have the community college system, and I was blessed to work for 10 years in the early days of that system as we built it up, and the work that they're doing in preparing our workforce is phenomenal, and I've got great deep feelings for that system. We have 2 land-grant universities in Louisiana. One is at Southern University up on the bluffs, and it is the only HBCU system of higher education that exists anywhere in the country. It's very impressive work going on there. Of course, many of you have heard of LSU, which is the flagship campus here in Baton Rouge, and they've got a vertically integrated system that includes healthcare delivery and the medical schools, and of course LSU Eunice and LSU-A, LSU Shreveport, and of course the flagship campus here in Baton Rouge. And listen, it is to all of our interests that we have a nationally competitive flagship, and LSU is certainly important to all of that. And so I asked John Crane, who is the president at Southeastern, when I was considering coming back to Baton Rouge to take this job, to describe the UL system to me, University of Louisiana system. He says, well, it's a system made up of everything that was left over after the other 3 systems were created. And I said, man, that's such a compelling vision for what we can be. I'm so excited. And listen, we do have, you look at these 9 distinct institutions, and you start with Grambling, 1901, these farmers of color in the piney woods of North Louisiana desperately needed some kind of opportunity for their children, so they write to the Tuskegee Institute. And Booker T. Washington sends a guy named Charles P. Adams to North Louisiana and creates Grambling State University. And when you think of Ralph Waldo Emerson Jones and Hutch Hutchinson, and I apologize to my friends from Southern, who created the world's greatest marching band. All right. One of 2 world greatest marching bands. How about that? And he was there at the same time as a guy named Eddie Robinson, right, whose impact and legacy in college football remains today. And you go down the road on I-20 at Louisiana Tech, where my parents went to school. Dad went in 1941, played football for 2 years, went overseas with the 2nd Division Marine Corps for 3 in the South Pacific, came back and played 2 more years at Louisiana Tech. And you look at the innovation and the renaissance that's going on in I-20 related to cybersecurity and technology that's driven by Louisiana Tech. And the southwest portion of the state, which is experiencing an economic renaissance, McNeese became the hub of that. McNeese also discovered the antibiotic qualities of alligator blood, which I'll let you research that on your own. I don't know if you drink it or inject it, but it tells you about scholarship and what's going on at these institutions. Nichols is our frontline defense for restoring the coast, and it's also the home of the John Folse Culinary Institute. Right? We can go and skip the one in the middle and go to Southeastern and the growing hub of the North Shore. It also is the only institution we have that has formal programs in Baton Rouge, the Southeastern Nursing School, right embedded in the medical district of Baton Rouge. UL Lafayette last year did $120 million in sponsored research, federal research, ranging everywhere from technology to digital media to cybersecurity. It also has one of the largest supercomputers that exist anywhere in the country. ULM is now home that'll open the doors in June to the first osteopathic medicine school in Louisiana. It is also home of the only public pharmacy school. So if you go to a pharmacist, they either went to Xavier or they went to ULM if they went to school in Louisiana. And of course, UNO is our only urban research institution. Now, Northwestern State, my alma mater, it's where I met my wife. I was walking to a speech class, and she walked past me, and I said, "My God, one of these days I'm going to marry that girl." And a year and a half later, she let me take her out on a date, and 5 months later, we got married. Our senior year. It's a great financial plan. I think we just recuperated from that just in this last year. But it was great. Northwestern was a great formative place for us. It also happens to be the oldest permanently dedicated site to higher education in the state of Louisiana. And each one of these institutions has a great story. There's also great rivalries that exist. And these are old rivalries. President Boyd, who was the president at Northwestern State in 1894, before he became the chancellor of LSU, you might know of Chancellor Boyd, he wrote a letter to the governor as they were about to open the doors on the Louisiana Industrial School, which became Louisiana Tech. And he said the industrial school will become a perpetual menace not only to the normal college, but to the state university in Baton Rouge. So for 125 years, we've been rivals, bitter rivals with Louisiana Tech. And 2 days before I became president at Northwestern State, Northwestern beat Tech in football on a last-second field goal. So I was relegated to the second page of the newspaper that week. But when you're president of your alma mater, that's a great place to be, especially in a town of Natchitoches, right? And everything is right at your fingertips, and you can really fall prey to that intoxicating feeling of being embedded in something like that. And it takes something very compelling to pull you away from that. And what pulled me away was the promise of these 9 distinct institutions working collectively, working systemically to achieve something special for a state that I love. And plus Tanya wanted to come back to Baton Rouge, that also helped. But when you think about what can happen when you have this power of a system to affect change, that's what brought us to Baton Rouge. And listen, the impact of the system is unmistakable. Just looking at the financial impact. When you look at the economic impact of the University of Louisiana system annually, it's $10.9 billion. 1 out of every 18 jobs in the state of Louisiana is directly related to the University of Louisiana system. Most of this is associated with our alumni. And we have alumni, 56,000 alumni in the greater Baton Rouge area from one of our schools. It's a tremendous impact on Louisiana. But even when you talk about numbers this big, I know this is going to shock you, there are still some folks that doubt whether investments in higher education is a sound investment. In fact, there was one great thinker that I found on Twitter, goes by Cali Conservative. I'm going to read this to you. He says, the modern college campus is nothing more than a very expensive daycare center. Colleges are filled with infantilized adults that can't do anything for themselves. Pardon my French. They graduate with crap degrees in liberal arts and can't find a job, so they blame capitalism and become socialist. Now, listen, this might be a little bit on the fringe, but there are people that have subscribed to this. And when you think about higher education as an expense, it's very easy to fall prey to this notion that we've got kids that are just becoming nothing. They're going and wasting their time getting English degrees like mine, English and journalism. And I was speaking to a gentleman the other day who runs one of the largest logistics companies in the greater New Orleans area. His degree is in liberal arts from University of New Orleans. But it's easy to fall prey to this, and there's this concept that's out there, this idea that's out there, it's not concept, called cognitive bias, right? We talked about all the Russians are hackers, right? So there's a technology basis to hacking and how they're influencing things with hacking. There's another piece of it, it's cognitive bias. When they find the way that we tend to think about things, you can post stories that just confirm somebody's beliefs, and they're going to believe it. When you hear something, even when you hear data like our economic impact data that conflicts with what you already believe, it affects you in your brain, in the same part of your brain that processes pain signals. Now, you're going to hear from a brain surgeon next week, so that's my limit on brain topics. But what happens when you process pain signals? You want to do whatever it takes to stop the pain. And if it's numbers that are causing you the pain, you just dismiss the numbers, right? Sometimes you even talk about the numbers and you dismiss them anyway. There was a recent article that came out from a lady that was talking about freelancers, and she was again devaluing the importance of a college degree, She said only 79.6% of freelancers say their degree is valuable in their everyday work. Only 79.6. Well, that's almost 4 out of 5. And so listen, if I put this graphic up and these were dentists, you would buy whatever toothbrush they were trying to sell you, right? But that number was even hard for her to process. And listen, we can be our own worst enemies. We can be our own worst enemies. I also found this. This came from academia. This is a professor. She put this out. She said one of the biggest lies in education is we must prepare students for the workforce, right? When she puts it in quotation marks, for the workplace. While huge corporations pay zero in tax, schools are then underfunded, and critical thinking is lost to a generation. Listen to this. It's not a teacher's job to prepare workers, but prepare thinkers. And I thought, what a narrow view of the work that we do. And so you have these arguments that fall into extremes, and sometimes it creates conflict, but it's manufactured conflict. You see, folks, as we enter into this new world of work, the difference between a worker and a thinker, not that it was ever that much different, but now they're becoming exactly the same, right? And we're going to talk a little bit more about why that is and what that means. But I want to give you a little bit more data, if you don't mind. This comes from the Georgetown Center on Education and the Workforce. And while this might be hard to see, but depending on your angle and because of the colors, these are different educational attainment levels. And what happened to workers with these educational attainment levels during the last recession and during the last recovery. And if you see that line on the bottom, you know that that's got to be negative if it's that far on the bottom. Those are workers with a high school diploma or less. And as you can tell, during the last economic downturn, they were the ones that suffered the most. And during the recovery, those are the ones that have benefited the least. Above that, in the positive area, of course, are those with associate degrees and certain certificates, and that's a very positive thing, and we're starting to see even more growth in that area with relevant credentials of value, and it's absolutely essential to our growth. But you can tell 8.4 million of the 11.6 million jobs that were created in the recovery went to those with bachelor's degrees. Now, the first criticism that will come from seeing a chart like this is correlation, it's not causation. And you can make a very good point of that. I could also make a point to you that gravity is actually correlation, not causation. We haven't been able to prove that yet, so we can get into semantics all day long. But when you dig a little bit further into this and look at correlation, and you compare this to this degree attainment to jobs based on skills, low skill, mid skill, and high skill occupations, you can tell that those jobs that have been created tend to be those in the high skill areas, and they're going overwhelmingly to those with a college degree. Now, this is statistics, right? And we can do all kinds of things with numbers, but I want you to think about what this represents and why this is occurring. And we know the main reason why, it's technology. Because this is what's happened from 2010 to 16. The earlier numbers were a little bit earlier than that. You think about how quickly technology has been advancing. I'm looking at this phone right here. This is an iPhone, right? And you think about the way this has transformed just about everything in our lives. Some of you are old enough to remember before we had cell phones. Is that being charitable enough? Right? I dare say without modern chemistry, a lot of the hair in here would look like mine. But those are the old days. Yeah, thank you. Yeah. But back in the days when you would drive home and you had your pager, right? And you get a page from your wife to pick up something that you had to go find a payphone and call home. This has transformed not just convenience, right, but the very world of work. I have an administrative assistant. 10 years ago, I walked into a job at Bossier Parish Community College, and there was a computer screen on my desk that had a sticky note on it. If the screen is black, wiggle the mouse. Yeah. If the screen stays black, call the IT department at this number and they'll come fix your computer. The guy I was replacing was not really technologically savvy, and that's okay. He was a phenomenal administrator, did a great job. But the assistant came in with 2 big calendars in her hand. And she says, I keep all of your appointments on this calendar, and then I copy it on my calendar, so then we both know what's going on. We're both on the same page. I said, I haven't used a calendar in a long time. I've got an earlier version of this. So I said, but I need everything on here. So she resigned. Not immediately, and she's a wonderful, wonderful person. But this technological change was hard for her to adjust to. And you think about those days, I'd come home from a conference with a bunch of cards, and an assistant would type them into a Rolodex, right? One of these machines. How much time do you think an administrative assistant spends today typing things into a Rolodex? It doesn't exist. You see, because of technology, we've freed that role up. So now they're making critical decisions about your organization. My administrative assistant right now is talking to someone and making a decision that affects 92,000 students across the state of Louisiana. So you shouldn't be surprised that while only 20% of administrative assistants across the country have a bachelor's degree, 70% of the job postings today for an administrative assistant have a bachelor's degree as a minimum qualification. The very nature of the work has changed. And listen, this is not something new. We can go back to how technology has changed jobs forever, and it's always a scary proposition for us to adjust. In the early 1800s, the Luddites, artisans in England, were terrified that technology was going to replace their jobs with cheap labor, so they burned down the factories and destroyed the machinery, right? In the 1930s, it was John Maynard Keynes who coined the term technological unemployment, that technology was advancing so quickly there wouldn't be enough work available to sustain all of us. Scary, scary times. Come all the way up 1966, an edition of Time magazine, that bastion of academic scholarship, Time magazine. They did a prediction on the future, right? And they brought in all these futurists, and they claimed that technology was advancing so quickly that by the year 2000, only 10% of us would be working. The rest of us would be looking for ways to spend our leisure time. We missed that one just a little bit, right? Some of us work. They had some great prediction there. One of them said that this idea of remote shopping, where you can dial in on your phone and order things and it'd be shipped to your house, would never really take off. And this is not me, this is Time magazine, so I beg your deference on this, but they said because housewives need to get out of the home and handle the merchandise, right? That was the reason. They could never have predicted that last year we would do more than $2.5 trillion in e-commerce. They also predicted that with the advances in science, we would have eliminated viruses and bacteria, right? But they didn't recognize that sometimes technology doesn't quite catch up and we can't predict the future, and we'd lose 60,000 infants in India to superbugs and superbacteria because we haven't been able to plan enough to adjust to these new realities. It's not always fun. But predicting the future is hard. Sometimes it's very hard. The top technology writer in 2006 for the New York Times said, I'm going to finally and definitively answer the question, when will Apple produce a cellular phone? And the answer is never. Yeah, predicting the future is hard. And so you can imagine for us being in higher education, we're trying to prepare a new generation for this future. And we don't know what that future is. You know how many app developers were on the 10-year occupational forecast in the year 2007? We hadn't even coined the term app developer yet. And yet there are so many opportunities for those that have the knowledge, skills, and ability to do app developing. And so we're trying to prepare for a world of 2030. And if you look at the predictions, they're dire. McKinsey says we're going to lose 400 to 800 million jobs by the year 2030 because of automation, because of robotics, because of artificial intelligence. OECD says we're not really going to lose the job, we're going to lose the job requirements, right? A lot of the skills, a lot of the tasks that you perform in a job, 47% of them could be automated, right? If we're strictly focused on teaching students what to do, if we're preparing just workers, as the academician was complaining about, we cannot compete when it comes to 2030. But if we're producing thinkers, we can produce those that can not only contribute to economic growth, their own economic vitality, the economic growth of their employer, but they can also control their own destiny, and they can be adaptable. And it's one of the reasons why we've moved from talking about skills just in and of themselves and started talking about capabilities. A recent report from Deloitte came out talking about the capabilities that are important for the future. And a lot of them are those same capabilities we've talked about in different kinds of language associated with higher education for a long time. Think critical thinking and problem solving and effective communication. You can add to that these new ideas of cultural competence, because a lot of the teams we work with today don't look like the teams that we might have grown up with. And they come from different backgrounds and have different cultures and have different approaches to things. We've got to expose our students to these new ideas and these new, so that they can work collaboratively with people that again, come from different backgrounds. Technological literacy. Everybody has got to use technology. The days of the sticky notes on the black computer screen are gone, folks. And technological literacy has got to be one of the foundational skills that we employ very early on. The key is to produce those that are adaptable. Because one thing is absolutely certain, is technology is going to keep advancing. I mentioned to you these eras of technological advance that led to some fear amongst the populace about job growth. Here's the difference. In those days, every time we've had an era of technological advance, we've reached a plateau. As we exhaust all of the innovations that can come with a technological advance, we plateau, and then the next one comes and we go through a new era. Because of machine learning, and because of artificial intelligence, and because things are exponentially growing, that curve on technological advance is going to continue to accelerate and become almost vertical, right? If it becomes vertical, that's called the singularity, and that's science fiction stuff, and I don't want to scare us too much at lunch. But we are in this era now of perpetual advance in technology that opens some extraordinary opportunities for us if we're prepared for it. Now, in Louisiana, I dare say we're not fully prepared for that new reality. If we have to have a more developed citizenry, and we know that we rank near 49th or 48th or 50th, depending on the measure in educational attainment, we're ill-prepared for that. And that's what drives our focus at the UL system, is how do we have each of these institutions, individually and collectively, produce at a higher level than ever before? Well, first, we have to define what these capabilities are. And so you will know in the coming year how these capabilities are embedded in every single degree and credential that comes from our institutions. You'll know not only can this engineer from Louisiana Tech design the bridge that I want to build, you'll know that they have been validated, that they can think critically and solve problems and communicate effectively. But it's more than an external promise. See, it's something that has to take place internally. We have to have our engineering professors know why it's important that this engineering graduate can talk about the allegory of the cave. Because Plato is as relevant 2,500 years later as he was then, let alone Toni Morrison, Dante, right? At the same time, we have to tell the poetry major it's insufficient for you to be able to just think and dwell with, and I love poetry, I can talk about them if I like. It's not enough just to be able to express your thoughts in art and in form, but you have to understand how that impacts the human condition today. And you have to be able to utilize the tools of profession today. So these core capabilities that cut across disciplines have to be understood and articulated and known. But we also know that if we focus only on those students that we get today that come through our normal pipelines through high schools, it's insufficient. 85% of the workforce that we're going to have in the year 2025 is already in the workforce today. Think about that. If we focus only on traditional age populations, we're never going to catch up. That's why we've created a program to reach out to that 1 in 5 Louisiana adults, the 653,000 that have some college and no degree. Now, who is in this population? Why would you have some college and no degree? Well, what happens when you go to school? Some of us go to school and we discover that we have a 10 o'clock curfew anymore. And you can stay out, at Natchitoches it was till 11, but in some places it's as late as 2 o'clock in the morning. And you know, a 10 o'clock class can really be an So we run into some behavioral issues. Sometimes it's a positive thing that happens. Sometimes we had a thing called the Haynesville Shale up in north central Louisiana that provided incredible job opportunities for someone that could leave school and go make great money, right? Because natural gas was at $14 an MCF, and I can go make $60,000, $70,000 a year, and the first thing I'm going to do is buy a new truck and a new trailer, and I'm going to work, and guess what? Natural gas goes to $4 an MCF, and that company that was paying me that money has picked up, and they've gone to the Eagleford Shale, or they're going to the north, and I'm stuck here with my truck note and my trailer note, maybe a girlfriend, maybe a boyfriend, maybe a baby, and I've got to figure out how to make ends meet. Going back to college is not an offing for me. Sometimes babies happen in college. I know that's a stretch. We're working on the reason why. But you'd be shocked at the number of students that have come to our schools, and they have children, and those children are now school going age, and all of a sudden I've got time. You know what? I wish I could go back and finish what I started, and I have no idea how to do that. And it's a huge number of people. In fact, in just the greater capital region alone, I can't read the number. It looks like 165,000 adults of that 653,000 right here in this area. And you think about it, so you're at home and you've just gotten the kids home from school, you're tired, you decide, I need to do something better. I want to go back to school, and the first thing you do is you try to find one of our applications online, and you get it, and one of the first things we ask for is your immunization records, right? Now, I've been immunized. I was immunized 50 years ago. But if you ask me to prove it to you, I'm going to have a difficult time proving it to you. I have no idea even where to go for that, right? But that's the first barrier that we put in place. And then we have to list all of the schools you've ever gone to, and you have to accumulate all of the transcripts that you've ever had. Goodness, now you're starting to eat into the most precious commodity that I have in my life, time. I don't have the time to do the things I do every day, and now you're going to make me expend even more of it so I can go back to school on the offering that I might get something better. Compete Louisiana is an intervention that lays across the top of this system that eliminates those barriers. We have coaches, concierges that work hand in hand with those that want to come back to school and complete their degree and stay with them all the way until graduation when they walk across that stage with a new credential and the new ability to benefit from that credential. It's an extraordinary intervention that we expect to be the largest game changer in the history of higher education in Louisiana. Now, we launched this softly over Memorial Day weekend. On Friday, we did an interview with the Advertiser in Lafayette. They did an editorial that ran on Sunday. By the time we came back to work on Tuesday, we had more than 1,000 calls from people that say, I want to go back to school and I don't know how. Not a single dollar in marketing, right? We're about to make the investment in marketing. So what started as, and by the way, we had not hired the first coach at this time. So Vice President Cammie Geisman and Vice President Janine Kahn and Vice President Erica Kelly all of a sudden became Vice President / coach because we had to implement the model. I've always been a proponent, if you're building an aircraft and the team that's dragging their feet is that those responsible for putting the landing gear down, the best incentive is to take off with them in the plane. But since then, we've employed now 9 coaches, right? And each has a caseload that could be up to 400 or 500 students. It's a perfectly scalable program. It's one that can eliminate those barriers, and we expect to have more than 10,000 students enrolled from this program alone over the next 5 years. It's going to be extraordinary, right? But it's just one piece of the puzzle. It's even more true. But the solution is to educate our populace, to provide them with the knowledge, skills, and ability they need to succeed, not only today, and listen, there is a tremendous demand right now for hard skills and you can learn today and go out and make a great living. But to prepare you with those capabilities that are going to ensure you're competitive in the future. That's the work of the University of Louisiana system. With that, I'd be happy to answer any of your questions. Yes, sir.
Dr. Henderson, appreciate the speech you gave. I've heard statistics before, and I was wondering, on them that the higher the education in a community collectively, the more moral the community is.
Well, so the question is on statistics that say that the higher the educational attainment level of the community, the more moral the community is. And I don't have any specific statistics on that, but if you think about education, how it causes you to think more critically, it does tend to make you more empathetic. And empathy is certainly a key component to working better with those around you. I think that that's probably a baseline of morality. I mentioned a couple of philosophers earlier, and I think the more that you've had to challenge yourself to think about things, you arrive at the right conclusions. I think human nature in and of itself is basically moral, and when you teach people to think and approach things in a very constructive way, I would imagine there's a deep correlation between the two. I hope that's fair.
Thank you.
Yes, sir. Other question? Yes, ma'am.
First of all, 50 years ago, I had to study Plato and the allegory of the cave, and I wondered, when am I ever going to have no?
There you are, see?
Check that off the list, so thank you.
Yes, ma'am.
Second thing is, how much, I've read three-figure numbers recently, how much has tuition, college tuition, gone up in the last 10 years? Because we live in a community where there's the greatest disparity between those who do well and those who don't. And I worry a lot about those who don't do well, because as the tuition goes up and we keep minimum wage at $7 an hour, I wonder, what would you say, first, what is the percentage, and second, what would you say to those working poor families about getting their kids to college?
That is an excellent question, and the very direct answer, in the last 10 years in Louisiana, tuition and fees for college and universities has virtually doubled, right? Now listen, you will see all kinds of articles about the skyrocketing cost of higher education. Folks, the cost of higher education has not gone up. Not in Louisiana, it hasn't. The cost has gone down. It's the price is the problem, right? It's the price. We went through a period, an 8-year period, where we disinvested in higher education, and we did what was called a fund swap. So we would reduce state investment in higher ed by $100 million, but we'll authorize colleges and universities to increase fees by $100 million, and then they remain the same, right? Well, they forget about tuition discounts, which is about 30%. They forget all these other things. So the cost per revenue per student has actually diminished slightly. But what we've done is we've made it harder and harder for those, especially first-generation students and students from lower socioeconomic backgrounds, to afford the price of higher education. And that's where we've got to make a focus, because, and listen, it means that we've got to do a job as administrators. We've tried to do work to eliminate administration at the University of Louisiana system. That's why we now rank 16th out of 16 southern states in the number of administrators per school, management level positions. We've reduced administrative costs the extraordinary amount, and dumping those dollars back into the classroom. We also have to find innovative ways to speed the time to a degree. It means eliminating those aspects of the program that don't add value to, if I apologize to my faculty friends who might be in the room, to the consumer, right? That's one of the advantages that's come from shifting the burden from the state to the student, is you have to be more responsive to that student's needs. Luckily in Louisiana, while we've seen it go up a considerable amount, we're still in the bottom third of southern region states in average tuition and fees, so we're still a good bargain. And when it comes to student debt, we're one of the lowest states in terms of student debt for graduates. So we're still a great bargain, but it's something that we've got to pay attention to. And if we're going to continue to put students into school, we've got to find a way to offset that price, because it's a burden that's insurmountable for many. Thank you for raising it. Thank you very much.
With the experience and resources for cases throughout Louisiana, Walters Papillon Thomas Collins, LLC, is proud to support LPB, specializing in personal injury and wrongful death, with information at lawbr.net.